So these are photos I took of a museum that used to be a Soviet Gulag in Riga, Latvia. I was there in 2018. Those yellow dots in the back wall are bullet holes that have been filled in, so you can see that they murdered a bunch of political prisoners in this very small room. Sadly, there seems to be a resurgence of this grotesque time in Russian history taking place right now. Stalinist practices are making a comeback in Putin's regime that are rooted in the enduring quote-unquote Soviet civilization, which seeks to return Russia to greatness, but really only brings back the grimmer facets of Stalinism. Things like collectivization, repression, ethnic cleansing, and the Gulag legacy are slowly re-emerging under Putin, and we're watching it happen while doing nothing. During Stalin's rule from 1927 to 1953, the Gulag system profoundly affected Russian society. Established in the early 1930s, these forced labor camps aimed to rapidly modernize the Soviet economy and reshape society through hard labor, known as perekovka, or a reforging. While Western scholars and much of the West have critically examined the Gulag system as terrible, modern Russian revisionism has largely erased it from public discourse and education. In fact, the last museum that highlighted the Soviet legacy of gulags in Russia was labeled a foreign agent and taken over by government officials in 2015, where the museum was changed to focusing on Russian timber production that helped during World War II. And it completely ignores the fact that it was a gulag. In present-day Russia, elements of Stalinist practices have re-emerged on a large scale, and the Russian people embrace it because Stalin's awful legacy has been whitewashed as textbooks are rewritten, museums are closed, and publications that are critical of the Stalinist era are labeled as foreign agents. So now, over 70% of Russians believe Stalin was a positive force in history. Convicts are once again being reforged for military operations, and they're doing it by using rhetoric reminiscent of the Stalinist era. On January 22, 2023, Yevgeny Prigozhin pardoned 124 criminals returning from the war zone, echoing Stalin-era speeches where he said, "Neither your grandfathers nor your great-grandfathers participated in such conflicts. Those who have seen Solidar know that Stalingrad pales in comparison. The motherland and the people of Russia owe you. You are no longer former convicts, but soldiers of the Wagner private military company, and there is no such thing as former Wagner warriors." This speech is reminiscent of Stalin, who believed that prisoners, through labor and exposure to military service and Soviet ideals, could be reshaped to align with the state's goals. This notion was promoted as a means of rehabilitating individuals while simultaneously contributing forced labor to war efforts and Soviet economic projects. Researchers are noting that Russia's current penitentiary system is starting to look more and more like the former Soviet Gulag system. Alexei Navalny, while serving as a political prisoner, described his prison camp as more or less like the old Soviet system, differing mainly only by the presence of churches in every prison camp. Facing labor shortages, Russian industries are now involved in these labor camps, and many state defense projects have increasingly relied on prison labor, which echoes past practices. Other groups are also recruited. In early 2023, students from the Chita Polytechnic College were sent to work in factories like the Chita Power Station, which lacked electricians due to wartime, and they were threatened with potential prison sentences or fines for not helping out. In fact, the system is now feeding itself because, like the Soviet era, there is this deeply institutionalized snitching or informing system where citizens are telling on each other out of a fear of being labeled themselves. And this is almost reminiscent of the NKVD, which was the People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs in the Soviet era, where basically citizens snitched on each other and sent them to gulags, and it was a self-perpetuating system. The mass mobilization that was initiated in September of 2022 also mirrors Stalinist, quote, mobilization terror efforts. They randomly, and I say randomly tongue-in-cheek, conscript civilians under threat of imprisonment, but many of those mobilized were previously targeted as potentially threats to the Kremlin or the pro-Putin regime. Current Russian governance is resembling Stalin's era more and more every day. There is hasty administrative decisions, immediate execution of orders without any kind of critical thinking, and this pervasive fear among officials and the populace. As in the 1930s, human resources are deemed unlimited, meaning human wave and meat wall and these throwing conscripts at the Ukraine problem continue to be prevalent, and they are doing this to compensate for technological and infrastructural deficits. Replicating Stalin's imperial ambitions supported by forced labor, today's Russia has renewed reforging campaigns that reintegrate former prisoners into society, but really they were used as indentured servants or slaves. And yet Russian society itself has, at best, fallen into a collective amnesia, at worst is operating under silent fear, much like during Stalin's time.